The sound came first. Low. Heavy. Unmistakable. It was not the scream of a dive bomber. Not the whistle of falling bombs. It was deeper than fear. Then the sky darkened. Not with clouds. With metal. Huge shadows crossed the ground. Fast. Relentless. Engines roared like rolling thunder. The earth began to shake. Men looked up. And froze. 8 guns opened fire at once. The air itself tore apart. Steel ripped through trees. Through trucks. Through flesh. Fire followed bullets. Explosions followed fire. There was no warning. No mercy. No escape. Buildings collapsed. Airfields burned. Convoys vanished in seconds. This was not precision. This was punishment. The pilots did not circle. They did not hesitate. They came low. Lower than fear. And when they pulled away, nothing moved. This was the moment Japan learned a new truth. The war had grown teeth. And its name was the P-47 Thunderbolt. The Second World War was not decided by courage alone. It was decided by control. Control of oceans. Control of supply lines. And eventually, control of the sky. In the Pacific, distance was an enemy as deadly as any weapon. Islands were scattered. Resources were fragile. Airfields were few. Whoever ruled the air could strike anywhere and disappear before an answer came. Japan understood this early. So did the United States. But air power was evolving faster than doctrine. Faster than expectations. Fighters were no longer just dueling machines. They became hunters of everything that moved. Factories. Trains. Fuel depots. Runways. And into this changing war came an aircraft few expected to dominate. Too large. Too heavy. Too brutal to be elegant. The P-47 Thunderbolt was not built to dance. It was built to endure. It could take damage and keep flying. It could dive faster than its enemies. And when it attacked the ground, it erased it. This was not air combat as Japan had prepared for. This was industrial war from above. And once the Thunderbolt arrived, the sky stopped being neutral. The P-47 Thunderbolt was never meant to be beautiful. It was meant to come home. When engineers first drew its shape, elegance was irrelevant. Survival was everything. The aircraft grew larger. Heavier. Stronger. At its heart was power on an industrial scale. A massive radial engine. More horsepower than many bombers carried earlier in the war. It drank fuel greedily. It demanded space. And it refused to be fragile. Armor wrapped around the pilot like a shield. Steel plates. Thick glass. Redundancy everywhere. If one system failed, another took over. If control lines were cut, backups remained. The Thunderbolt was built with damage in mind. Not to avoid it, but to survive it. Enemy bullets tore through wings. Shrapnel ripped into fuselages. And still, the aircraft flew. Pilots returned with holes large enough to see daylight. Engines scarred. Frames bent. Any other fighter would have fallen. The P-47 endured. It was fast in a dive. Unstoppable once gravity took control. Enemy fighters learned this quickly. They could turn tighter. They could climb faster. But they could not follow the Thunderbolt down. The P-47 dove like a falling building. Fast. Violent. Final. This changed how it fought. Hit hard. Break contact. Climb back to safety. The aircraft dictated the rules. Not the enemy. Pilots trusted it with their lives. Not because it was gentle, but because it was honest. It did not promise safety. It promised survival through strength. And in a war where mistakes were fatal, that promise meant everything. The Thunderbolt was not a blade. It was a hammer. And once unleashed, it would be swung without restraint. The Thunderbolt was not designed to win dogfights. It was designed to dominate battlefields. Once air superiority was established, the mission changed. The P-47 went lower. Much lower. Below the clouds. Below the mountains. Below the margin of error. At treetop height, speed became a weapon. And weight became an advantage. 8.50 caliber machine guns lined its wings. Not as decoration. As a statement. When they fired, the sound was continuous. Not bursts. Not warnings. A solid wall of steel. Tracers stitched the ground. Vehicles exploded. Fuel ignited instantly. Columns of smoke replaced supply convoys. Cratered runways replaced airfields. Nothing unarmored survived direct contact. The Thunderbolt did not linger. It struck. It vanished. Pilots memorized terrain like maps of survival. Rivers. Roads. Valleys. They used speed to stay alive. Momentum to escape. Rockets were added. Then bombs. The aircraft grew even deadlier. One pass could erase an entire position. A second ensured nothing was left to repair. Japanese troops learned to fear clear weather. Sunlight meant visibility. Visibility meant thunderbolts. There was no safe movement during the day. No secure road. No hidden depot. Camouflage delayed the inevitable. It did not prevent it. Anti-aircraft fire filled the air. Black bursts. Red tracers. The P-47 flew through it. Hits were expected. Damage was normal. As long as the engine ran, the mission continued. Pilots counted impacts after landing. Not during the attack. The aircraft absorbed punishment meant to destroy it. And answered with more fire. This was not air combat as tradition defined it. This was systematic destruction. The sky was no longer a place of observation. It became an active threat. For those below, the war no longer came from the horizon. It came straight down. And when the Thunderbolt's shadow crossed the ground, everything beneath it understood the meaning of total air power. For Japan, the Thunderbolt did not represent a single aircraft. It represented a condition of war that could not be reversed. Every road became dangerous. Every rail line became a liability. Every open field became a target. Supply convoys moved at night. And still they burned. Fuel trucks vanished in seconds. Ammunition dumps erupted like volcanoes. Airfields were attacked before aircraft could take off. Runways were shredded. Hangars collapsed. Fighters that survived the bombing phase were destroyed on the ground. Repairs became impossible. Spare parts stopped arriving. Fuel became more valuable than aircraft. The Thunderbolt hunted infrastructure. Not glory. It did not chase symbols. It erased function. Bridges were cut. Ports were crippled. Factories slowed to silence. Every successful strike multiplied its effect. One destroyed truck meant dozens of soldiers went hungry. One cratered runway grounded an entire squadron. Japanese commanders understood the math. They simply could not change it. Anti-aircraft guns fired relentlessly. But accuracy required time. And the Thunderbolt did not give it. It attacked fast. And left faster. Even when hit, it returned. Damaged aircraft became proof of failure. Each surviving Thunderbolt carried a message. This weapon could not be easily removed. Morale eroded quietly. Not through defeat in battle, but through exhaustion. Troops waited for attacks they could not prevent. They hid without safety. They moved without protection. The war on the ground slowed to a crawl. Not because men refused to fight, but because survival required stillness. Japan was not only losing aircraft. It was losing mobility. Losing momentum. Losing time. The Thunderbolt did not conquer territory. It denied Japan the ability to hold it. And in modern war, that loss is often fatal. The Thunderbolt was powerful. But it was nothing without the men inside it. Young pilots climbed into the cockpit carrying more than equipment. They carried responsibility. And the knowledge that mistakes had no mercy. Most were not fearless. They were focused. They learned quickly that survival depended on discipline. Altitude mattered. Speed mattered. Timing mattered most of all. Before every mission, they studied maps until they could fly them blind. Rivers became lifelines. Hills became shields. Valleys became escape routes. Once airborne, there was no room for doubt. Orders were clear. Targets were known. But combat never followed plans. Flak erupted without warning. Tracers climbed toward them like claws. The sky filled with noise and violence. Pilots pushed through anyway. They dove knowing they would be fired upon. They held steady knowing hesitation meant death. The cockpit shook. Metal screamed. The aircraft absorbed impact after impact. And still, they pressed the trigger. Some returned with damaged controls. Some with wounded engines. Some with blood in the cockpit. Many did not return at all. Those who survived carried the weight of absence. Empty bunks. Unanswered roll calls. Yet the next morning, they flew again. Not for medals. Not for fame. They flew because the mission demanded it. The Thunderbolt gave them confidence, not comfort. They trusted its strength. They trusted its speed. But ultimately, they trusted each other. Wingmen stayed close. Formations tightened under fire. If one aircraft went down, the others completed the attack. This was not recklessness. It was understanding. The war would not pause for grief. Each mission carved experience into memory. Each loss hardened resolve. By the end, these pilots were no longer learning how to fight. They were learning how to endure. The Thunderbolt was forged in factories. Its pilots were forged in fire. Together, they became a force that could not be ignored. Not because they were unstoppable, but because they refused to stop. Japan did not lack courage in the air. It lacked answers. The Thunderbolt presented a problem that doctrine could not solve. It was too fast in a dive. Too tough to destroy quickly. Japanese fighters were designed for agility. Light frames. Tight turns. They excelled in classic dogfights. But the Thunderbolt refused to play that game. It did not turn. It did not linger. It attacked with altitude. With speed already banked. By the time defenders reacted, the P-47 was already firing. And by the time they aimed, it was already gone. Anti-aircraft guns tried to compensate. More barrels. More fire. But low-level attacks reduced reaction time to seconds. Crews fired blindly. Often too late. Hits were scored. But kills were rare. The Thunderbolt could lose cylinders and keep running. Lose panels and keep flying. Japanese interceptors attempted pursuit. But following a P-47 downward was a fatal mistake. Gravity favored the heavier aircraft. Speed multiplied beyond control. Those who followed often failed to pull out. Fuel shortages made training limited. Experienced pilots were irreplaceable. Losses accumulated faster than replacements. Meanwhile, American logistics never slowed. More aircraft arrived. More pilots rotated in. Every destroyed Thunderbolt was replaced. Every lost Japanese fighter was felt. Radar coverage was incomplete. Communication lines were fragile. The Thunderbolt exploited every weakness. It forced Japan to defend everything. Every road. Every base. Every movement. And defending everything meant defending nothing well. The war became reactive. Always responding. Never controlling. Japan could still fight. Still resist. But it could no longer dictate the terms. The Thunderbolt did not need to win every encounter. It only needed to keep coming back. And that Japan could not stop. Long before the Thunderbolt appeared, the damage had already begun. Its presence changed behavior. Not strategy. Behavior. Movement slowed. Convoys hesitated. Orders were delayed. Men learned to look at the sky before looking ahead. Clear weather became a warning. Blue skies meant danger. Engines heard in the distance caused panic. Not because bombs were falling, but because they might. The Thunderbolt did not need to attack constantly. The expectation of attack was enough. Troops scattered at the sound of aircraft. Vehicles were abandoned. Supplies were hidden and forgotten. Discipline weakened under constant pressure. Fatigue replaced confidence. Sleep came in fragments. Always listening. Always waiting. The mind never rested. Each pass reinforced the same lesson. You could not see it coming. You could not stop it. There was no duel. No chance to respond. Only survival instincts. Some units refused to move during daylight. Others moved anyway and paid the price. Commanders struggled to enforce orders. Fear undermined authority more effectively than defeat. Rumors spread faster than aircraft. Exaggerated numbers. Imagined weapons. The Thunderbolt became more than a machine. It became a symbol. A reminder that the enemy was everywhere. Watching. Waiting. Even when the sky was empty. The threat remained. This was warfare beyond destruction. It was domination of attention. The Thunderbolt consumed focus. Energy. Hope. Japan was being worn down not only materially, but mentally. And wars are rarely lost when men stop fighting. They are lost when men stop believing movement is possible. The Thunderbolt did not crush Japan in a single blow. It pressed constantly. Day after day. Mission after mission. Until fear itself became a weapon. When the Thunderbolt's missions began to slow, its influence did not end. The P-47 had already changed how war was understood. It proved that fighters did not need elegance to dominate. They needed endurance. Survivability became doctrine. Firepower became priority. Future aircraft would no longer be built only to win duels. They would be built to survive hostile skies. And destroy everything below them. The Thunderbolt demonstrated that air superiority was not enough. Air denial mattered more. Destroying enemy aircraft was important. Destroying the enemy's ability to operate was decisive. Runways mattered more than fighters. Fuel mattered more than pilots. This lesson echoed long after the war ended. Post-war designs grew heavier, stronger, more resilient. Armor returned to aircraft design. Redundancy became standard. The idea of the multi-role fighter was born from experience. Aircraft that could escort, strike, survive. The Thunderbolt's legacy appeared in jets that followed. In attack aircraft designed to fly low and absorb punishment. Its influence reached beyond blueprints. It reshaped thinking. Commanders learned that constant pressure breaks resistance faster than isolated victories. The Thunderbolt was never glamorous. It rarely starred in propaganda. But professionals remembered it. Pilots trusted machines like it. Planners built strategies around its reliability. Wars after 1945 would increasingly rely on aircraft that could stay on station, return damaged, and fly again tomorrow. The P-47 had shown that dominance was not about perfection. It was about persistence. And that lesson would define modern air warfare. Far more than any single battle ever could. By the time the war neared its end, the Thunderbolt no longer needed introduction. Its sound alone carried meaning. The P-47 did not deliver surrender papers. It delivered inevitability. Japan was still fighting. Still resisting. Still enduring. But the space to maneuver was gone. Roads were broken. Fuel was scarce. Airfields were unusable. The sky belonged to someone else. The Thunderbolt did not claim victory by itself. No single weapon ever does. But it ensured that resistance became harder each day. Slower. More costly. It removed options. And war without options ends only one way. When peace finally arrived, it did not erase what had happened from the air. Pilots returned home carrying memories that never appeared in reports. Ground crews watched scarred aircraft shut down. After missions that history would summarize in a sentence. The Thunderbolt itself faded quietly. Replaced by jets. Replaced by new doctrines. But its lesson remained. Air power was no longer just about reach. It was about pressure. Relentless. Unavoidable. The P-47 proved that control of the sky meant control of time, movement, and survival itself. It was not the fastest. Not the most elegant. It was simply there. Every day. And in war, that consistency becomes decisive. When Japan faced America's flying firestorms, it was not the flames that ended the fight. It was the understanding that the thunder would never stop coming.